introduce myself. I'm Kathy Urffer, River Steward for Connecticut River Conservancy in Vermont and New Hampshire, which makes up more than half of the river. And Andrea, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Andrea. I'm a river steward for CRC and cover the Massachusetts part of the watershed. Thanks for joining us today.
I'm Tom Christopher. I've been representing New England Flow since it was formed now almost 30 years ago. And we've been concerned with whitewater recreation throughout New England for all those years. And more recently, we've been focusing on opportunities to improve whitewater recreation on the Connecticut River and any of the tributaries that flow into the river.
We can go around the room and I'll call on people, I think, because that's a little easier. Pete?
Hi, my name's Pete Fellows. I work for the Two Rivers Ottaquechee Regional Commission, which serves river towns from Newbury, Vermont, down to Heartland, Vermont, and all the towns, Bradford, Hartford, Norwich, Thetford in between. I grew up in Walpole, New Hampshire, lived in Plainfield. When I was young and stupid, I water skied on the Connecticut, and I've canoed and camped and done all sorts of things.
Great. Walter Ramsey?
Yeah, Walter Ramsey, town planner, town of Montague. Been involved with the FERC relicensing since it started, and Montague hosts the Turner's Falls Hydro Dam as well as the power canal that runs through downtown. And there's a lot of discussion about increased flows in the bypass, and the town is advocating for some recreational improvements to the river and river access points and so forth.
Thanks. Karen Foster?
Hi, I'm Karen Foster. I'm the executive director of All Out Adventures. We're a private nonprofit that works on state and federal contracts to make outdoor recreation accessible to people with disabilities and seniors and veterans. We run kayaking and stand-up paddleboarding programs on the Connecticut River. We're most active between Sunderland and Northampton, Massachusetts.
Kristen Sykes?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Kristen Sykes. I work for the Appalachian Mountain Club. I'm based in Western Massachusetts. I'm our Director of Southern New England Conservation Projects and Partnerships. We've been involved in the FERC relicensing here on the Connecticut River since it began. We've also been leading the effort to increase campsites on the Connecticut River Paddlers Trail, so we can have a source to sea paddle from New Hampshire to the Long Island Sound. So we're really concerned about having improved put-ins, in particular ones that are ADA accessible, new Paddlers Trail campsites, and also increased support of recreation at Northfield Mountain, including climbing at Rose and Farley ledges. And I'm a big paddler, primarily a canoeist. Thanks so much.
Great. David Dean?
Good morning, all. I am a former legislator in Vermont and a former river steward with the Connecticut River Conservancy. But right now I am president of the Connecticut River Valley chapter of Trout Unlimited that serves Windham County, Vermont, and parts of Cheshire County, New Hampshire. I spent 25 years as a professional Orvis endorsed and New Hampshire licensed fly fishing guide. So I know we've all interacted with lots of waters in the Connecticut River watershed, but I'll bet you I'm the only one that's been up to his arse in most of it.
Great. Noah Pollock?
Good morning, everybody. Yeah, this is Noah Pollock. I work with the Vermont River Conservancy and the Northern Forest Canoe Trail, and I've been working on recreational projects along the Connecticut River for over 10 years, mostly as part of the Connecticut River Paddlers Trail. Helped kind of do some assessments of the needs and opportunities through this relicensing process.
Thanks, Noah. Andrea Lamas?
Hi, yes, I'm the town administrator for the town of Northfield. I probably have the least amount of knowledge, but I've been following along for the last year or so. And since First Light does tend to want to call me, so I've been trying to learn as much as possible through this process because they do reach out to us here at the town, and I want to make sure that I know a little bit about what's going on with everybody before I talk to them and when I talk to them.
Well, thanks, everybody. I know there are some others who have roles. If somebody wants to chime in, please do so. Otherwise, as we get to the question and answer and discussion part, you can always identify yourself at that time.
Great. So we'll provide a little bit of detail and background here. I can figure out how to share the screen. Here we go. And Andrea will start with a little bit of the detail provided in the application from First Light. So go ahead.
Yeah, so although we want to have time for discussion, I just did want to frame it, give people a sense of what has been proposed by First Light. And they've split their application into, they had initially been proposing to merge everything into one license application, but now it's, they've split up the projects. And so for Turner's Falls project, they are proposing to put a trail and put in below the Turner's Falls Dam. And I've included what they've listed as the potential capital cost for each of these projects. They're also going to create a formal trail and steps for, they call it a takeout at Poplar Street, but I think it's better if we regard this as just an access location where people would put in or take out. This has been something I've had, there's a picture of it on the right. It's extremely steep slope, very difficult to get a canoe in and very, very difficult to get a canoe out of the water. At this location, most people use the gradual trail that goes onto private property instead of this location, but at that property does get posted and there are signs up right now. The company's also proposing to create 8 whitewater releases on Saturdays for 4 hours at different flows, and their application in December did have a cost associated with that, but at the moment they're saying that's to be determined because the companies need to redo their flow models, and so they'll recalculate what the impacts on their generation revenue is. And then they're in a filing in March, they clarified that they're planning to spend $20,000 a year on implementing their recreation management plan, which essentially is maintaining the sites that they already have in place that are part of the current license. And then I've just added what their annual revenue was at the top there, 18.1 million for 2019. This was in their Exhibit D of the amended final license application. For Northfield Mountain, their reported revenue was $158 million, and they are planning to put a new trail and put in at the Riverview where the boat, this is like across the street from the Northfield Mountain Recreation and Education Center. this would be at there's a little stream that goes, that's part of the park near where the restroom is, and you walk over it to get to the pavilion. And that'll be a put in there. And then they're having to move the boat tour dock at Riverview to accommodate a new barrier net at Northfield Mountain. We regard this as just kind of like a collateral cost of the barrier net, not so much an enhancement, but they're counting that as an enhancement. And then they're going to put a formal access trail in at Cabot Camp, which is located very close to my background picture here, but it's basically at the confluence of the Millers River and the Connecticut River. And then I couldn't believe this was true, but they're saying that they're only going to spend $1,000 a year implementing their recreation management plan. I clarified to make sure this was not a typo with their consultant, and apparently this is true, and I'm not really sure how they can possibly even mow the lawns at their education center for that amount of money each year. So this is a real red flag for me anyway. Any immediate questions, or we can discuss it later on after Kathy summarizes what Great River Hydro is proposing.
Andrea, if I may.
Yeah.
Hi there, Steve Ellis, Town of Montague. So my question was, in terms of the costs that are identified here, to the extent that they differ from those presented in the application, can you explain the basis for that? Many of these are, down by a factor of one, divided by 1,000 in reference. So, for example, the trail and put in below the Turner's Falls Dam was listed in the executive summary as a $1.3 million total cost. So I want to make sure I understood the basis for the 183,000.
The 183 was what they put in their answers to FERC, the questions that they had. This was in a table that was submitted to FERC in mid-March.
Okay.
The executive summary included, their tables included the capital cost as well as projected revenue losses from electricity. So those costs were hugely inflated, and it's very difficult to figure out how they came up with those numbers. I'm not sure why, for example, creating or improving Poplar Street would have a long-term generation effect for them.
Nor do I. Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
So let me zip through the couple of slides on Great River Hydro, and then we can stop sharing so we can actually see each other. If the thing will move. There we go.
Andrea, there's just a question in the chat. I don't know if you saw that.
Yeah, maybe Andrea, you want to reply to that while I go on?
Sure. The question is there any relation to the revenue to the budgets here? There's no direct relationship, but in our sort of recommendations with AMC, we think that the revenue that the companies make should, or let's see, we think that their investment in recreation should be reflective of the revenue. So, the licenses are going to be in place for 40 to 50 years. And so we think that the investment in the recreation facilities and the management of them should be, a significant investment. And you know, in the case of First Light, I think they really can afford it. And what they've offered seems to be much less than what they've spent in the past, because they have typically spent, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars per year maintaining their recreation, according to some of the filings they've had to do in the past.
So similarly, I tried to structure this in the same way Andrea did for the 3 projects. It's a little harder because of the geographic scope of where Northfield Mountain and Turner's Falls are. You can sort of talk about those 3 towns and more specific projects. Because the Great River Hydro projects covers, you know, 150 miles and 30 towns, it's a little harder to get into the details town by town. When Great River Hydro submitted their revised application in December, they really didn't have any detail for recreation mitigation included in that. They had just included that they were going to maintain 2 of the primitive campsites that are part of the Connecticut River Paddlers Trail. And then in response to a request for additional information from FERC in March, so they have a March 29 letter that provided additional information. They included 3 Excel spreadsheets that had more financial detail about their protection mitigation and enhancement costs over the course of the license. So this table here is taken from that Excel spreadsheet, which provides just this detail on essentially what they're putting forth so far for recreation. So I've broken this down by Wilder, Bellows Falls, and Vernon. So you can glean from this some of the things that it looks like they may be willing to do for the Wilder facility. You know, one of the conversations, because it covers such a big area, one of the conversations is the difference between what is on-site mitigation for recreation enhancements and what is off-site mitigation for recreation enhancements. The presence of the 3 dams, you know, are creating obstacles to navigation, and certainly for the Connecticut River Paddlers Trail or any through paddling, that's a problem that you can't really mitigate for just at one site. It's really sort of it's a impact to the recreational economy in the whole region. So we would certainly like to see both on-site mitigation and some process for off-site mitigation. And I think that, you know, Great River Hydro has not put a recreation plan together like First Light did. We are hoping that that will occur, you know, with more conversations and more fleshing out of the investments over the next 40 years. But, you know, for this example, for Wilder, you can see there are some capital expenses that will be taken care of, you know, hopefully up front. And there is a time scale attached to this. I just couldn't fit it all on the slide. You know, but there are some capital expenses for improvements that would probably happen in the shorter term. And then there's this line, additional recreation maintenance for enhancements, which is a larger sum of money, which I think would be essentially maintenance. And I'm hoping that some of that would go for offsite mitigation in the whole project area. And this is the Wilder Dam Fish Ladder parking area as it stands now, and the Wilder Portage Trail, which are, you know, not so inviting. How they look.
A quick question, Kathy, though, I mean, all these numbers, I've written grant applications before, they're all nice and have a lot of zeros in them. So these are kind of, they haven't like done any engineering or design for any of these. They're still pie in the sky kind of, you know, a list at this point.
I don't know. I think so. Yeah. And my guess is that this is a guess.
Okay.
And to me, these are, you know, that number, like, so if you think of Bellows Falls, the revenue for 2019 from, again, Exhibit D in their application is almost $14 million. But what they're proposing here is a recreation investment of $23,000 kind of per year for the next 40 years, which to me is just, it's not enough, you know? And if you go back and look at their Form 80s submitted, you know, over the past, you know, 20 years, 30 years. What they have accounted for can vary wildly, you know, between like 20,000 in a year to 80,000 in a year. So, you know, having some consistent understanding, again, this goes back to what Andrea said about, you know, a percentage of revenue or some standard amount per year, you know, I think would be more reasonable. And then, you know, thinking about how that gets spent over time so that when we get to the end of this next license, there's still money and there's still support for, you know, the recreation access areas. And then, so I'll just flip through these next two a little bit and then we can dig into questions. So this is what has been proposed for Vernon. You know, some new docks, some ADA improvements, and then again, that kind of lump sum of money for recreation maintenance. And the pictures there of the Vernon Portage, the takeout, which is often because of where the boom is, there's like trash piled up there. You have to kind of like paddle through the trash to get out and then the put in. And then the other thing I just wanted to share, so people are aware of it, is one of the other exhibits in the application is Exhibit G, which has project area maps. And they're, you know, this is a kind of a detail of around the Wilder Dam. And you can see that the Great River Hydro has, and this is true for First Light as well, there's different ownership interest in the adjacent land. So this sort of striped area is where the company actually owns flowage easements for properties. And the light gray area is where they indicate that they own property outright. So this example is across the street from Wilder, but adjacent to that light gray parcel is a huge recreation parcel owned by, well, available in the town of West Lebanon. And so, but there's no recreation development on Great River Hydro's parcel that's proposed. So having access to these maps and sort of understanding like what is in the project area, what would be on site, what would be off site, and where enhancements might occur is, I think, just helpful for folks. And then this is a quick summary. You know, as we said, we had submitted to FERC some recreation recommendations for all 5 projects a couple years back. And this is sort of a quick summary of some of those that we were hoping to see under this new license. And we're glad to share that, the fuller list of these recommendations with everyone. And I think, yeah, that's all we had. So I'll stop sharing and then we can answer questions. It sounds like somebody else was.
I don't know if it's time to jump in. My name is David Thomas with Stellar Kayaks in Northfield. And I don't know if it's the right forum, but I didn't see anything outside of infrastructure here. And I think what I've seen personally in Northfield, which is a kind of a deep water impoundment, is it's mostly power boaters. And there's kind of been a degradation of like usage there. Was a lot of partying and that sort of stuff in the river. I think there needs to be some sort of outreach to make it more friendly to human powered craft. It'd be nice to kind of roll that into this whole thing with this budget for that, just for education about sharing the river, that sort of stuff, and getting more people in the water to make it more friendly. So.
Thanks. That's a good good suggestion. That was something that was kind of included as part of when Holyoke Dam was relicensed. There was a partnership between Holyoke Gas and Electric to make a and Massachusetts DCR and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to make a river ranger job, but it has proved difficult because of the collaborative who would staff that position, and then at least down in that section of the river, there's a lot of activities related to like drug dealing on the river and other stuff, and you really need more of a law enforcement presence, which this position was not. So I don't know if I get the sense that this section, the Northfield section, isn't sort of, doesn't have that same issue, but let me know if you think it does, whether just outreach only would be sufficient.
I think also, Dave, I mean, we're obviously going to comment on these applications when we have a public opportunity at the end of the summer, but that's the kind of comment that would be great for, you or folks that you are also, hanging out on the water with or recreating with to provide, because FERC needs to hear from more than just us. They're hearing from us for sure. They need to hear from a lot of the people who live in the area so that they understand that there is real engagement here. Kristen, go for it. You had your hand up.
Great. Thanks, Kathy. I just wanted to share that AMC worked with Kestrel Land Trust and others on the lower part of the river. There's an island people might be familiar called Mitch's Island that has mixed ownership. It's become a party spot. It's become a squatting area where people camped out for the whole summer. There's definitely been a lot of challenges there. And we worked with a number of different municipal police forces, as well as the environmental police, including in Hadley, East Hampton, South Hadley, a number of towns. And actually they have been going and monitoring the river and then visiting the campsite and actually citing people for trespassing some of the islands owned by DCR. So I'm happy to talk about that offline, and maybe this is what you're thinking about, David. I think they've found that if they do come out with the blue lights on the boats at the beginning of the season, so like around Memorial Day, and then like 4th of July, and then just our presence so that people are aware that there is some kind of monitoring on the river, we found that to be pretty helpful. And so I think there's probably something, Kathy, Andrea et al., that we could do to see if we could get some kind of maybe even support. I know that the conversations that CRC and AMC had with Holyoke Gas and Electric around the River Ranger did include some funding for increased law enforcement and just presence on the river. So maybe that's worth asking about. But David, it'd be great to get a little bit more of a sense of what you're seeing and what you'd like to see as far as some kind of presence on the river. Again, I think if there's something on key weekends, especially at the beginning of the season, middle, end of the season, like a Sunday, 4th of July, or something like that, then that goes a long way.
Thanks, Kristen. Bruce, go ahead.
Well, my question is relatively general, so I'm happy to wait if other people have more specific things about these discussions.
No, I go for it.
Okay.
It's a free for all.
I'm Bruce Stedman, the Executive Director of the Conway School of Landscape Design. Somewhere in my past, I was an advisor to the World Commission on Dams, having to do with public engagement. And I had a very minor role in the decommissioning of the dams on the Elwha River in Washington State. So I have two questions. Overall, how satisfied are you with the public engagement aspect of this whole process? It could be it's terrible. It could be, well, it's okay, but it could be a lot better. Or, well, compared with other processes, it's not too bad. Those are sort of the choices. And then my other question is there any of the dams in the system decommissioning being discussed?
I don't think there's been a great public engagement process specifically around recreation and the potential recreation plan under the next license. From my perspective, Great River Hydro did a recreation study. But that was several years ago. In the meantime, we've been having a lot of conversations with the towns and learning about all kinds of efforts that are underway that I feel like Great River Hydro would be in a great position to support or know about. And I would love to see them do a really public outreach, meetings, discussions in all the towns to actually like find out what would be most useful to the towns and to both states. But I haven't seen that happen yet. Having said that, Great River Hydro is compared to First Light, is much more pleasant company to work with. You know, they've been transparent and really great in a lot of different ways. And so with that, I'll pass it off to Andrea.
Well, I think just more generally in terms of public engagement, the process has gone on for many, many years. And so I think it's been one of those things that the public doesn't know exactly when is a good time to weigh in. And so we saw good attendance at these. There were listening sessions at the very beginning of the process in 2013. And so now we're at 2021. I think people, you know, don't know when is the time where we can intervene and stuff. And so, you know, these coffee hours are one way that we're trying to engage more people. And there's lots of, we've been doing op-eds in the paper. There's lots of different ways we could or should be, you know, getting the word out. I know, you know, Carl Meyer is also writing op-eds in the Recorder and Gazette. And I got a call from somebody in Hadley who was astounded that Northfield Mountain pulls water out of the river every day, had never heard of that. And so I think there's, you know, quite a range of understanding of whether that these facilities even exist. You know, we noticed when there was a pipeline that was proposed to go through this part of Western Mass and part of Southern New Hampshire, there was a lot of engagement in that. And I think maybe people mobilize more when there's an actual threat and these facilities are already there. So, you know, there's not as much of an urgency, I would say. In terms of the second part of your question, Bruce, about whether there's talk of removing any of the facilities, I would say that hasn't been identified as a real possibility. I think certainly they have a huge impact on the Connecticut River, but there hasn't been one particular dam that seems ripe for coming out. What we have been doing is trying to, I guess, suggest or request that there would be some sort of a retirement fund for dams, much as there is for nuclear power plants, so that if the day came when any of these dams were not really justified economically, that then they would come out. We have watched the situation like on the Penobscot and how that was negotiated. And I think it helped that there was one company that owned multiple dams. So, you know, we have Holyoke Gas and Electric, First Light, and Great River Hydro. It would be kind of hard to figure out which one would take the loss and which, you know, obviously the lowermost dam is the first barrier, which is at Holyoke. So I don't know. Definitely something. Yeah.
We got a few folks in line here. I know Tom Christopher just had his hand up, and then put it down. Tom,
I'll speak a little bit about the public engagement, and it is certainly by far much better today than when I started 32, 33 years ago. Back in those days, if you showed up at their door, the door was locked and you were escorted off the property. Today, after a number of successful relicensings throughout here in New England and throughout the rest of the country, certainly they're willing to engage before they dismiss you. And I guess I would point out that every project is a separate challenge, not only to achieve different levels of mitigation, but also to engage the public, because the general public is really not aware of these things. And the fact that you can draw attention to it and that people finally recognize that, they do get a lot of their reliability on their power stream comes from dams, and they play an important role in what the energy mix is going to be in the future. And what's happening now is some of us who have been doing this for a while is the installation of batteries. And that is going to completely change the perspective on how energy is going to be created, stored, and managed in the future. So as much as, 30 years ago, I wanted to take out every dam I ever ran into, I'm not so sure that I feel the same way today, because obviously our societal needs are changing. And in terms of engagement, the more engagement we have, the better off we are as stakeholders and as a society in general. But it is still a challenge. And I look at all the meetings that all of us have been to. Well, I think we started in 2012 on First Light and also now Great Hydro. The meetings at least are no longer contentious. There is a tone of civility, there is a tone of professionalism, and there certainly is a willingness to listen. Whether or not they reject what you have to say is irrelevant, but we're better off today than we were years ago, that's for sure.
Thanks, Tom. Karen and David, you both have your hands up. I don't know which one was raised first.
Go ahead, Karen.
Thanks, David. I'm not sure either. I just wanted to bring up for us to keep in mind in the conversations around recreation, and I think you have it there. But as I was looking at the infrastructure budgeted and the infrastructure improvements, there's talk of improving ADA accessible parking and picnic tables, and that's great, but people who have disabilities need to be able to access the water as well. And to First Light's credit, they did call me yesterday and we talked about their dock systems, but there are dock systems that promote accessibility and we might think of it just for wheelchair users, but it will also help beginning kayakers and people who are older and who are experiencing reduced mobility. And that, I would hate to see an opportunity to push for real meaningful access to the river slide by. And then of course, I think you pointed it out as far as what's budgeted for management. If you put a dock in, there needs to be a budget to maintain and manage and oversee it. So that's really important. And then the other thing that I tried to impress upon First Light, but I'm just going to say again here, is that physical infrastructure improvements are one piece of providing meaningful access to the river. But people who are not able to transport and carry their own watercraft need assistance in order to have access to the river. And so, it's not just about building a beautiful ramp, but open arms, outreach, assistance are what actually make that accessible to people.
Thanks, Karen.
I hope that Great River Hydro will also reach out to you there. And I know there are some other, folks further up with similar expertise to really get your input as they think about like how to invest in those, improving the access areas.
Yeah, I'd welcome that. I would hate to see barriers go up that are not intentional when we have an opportunity to reduce barriers right here.
I'm really glad to hear that First Light reached out to you. I didn't know they were doing that. So yeah, I'd also like to just chat with you sometime offline, maybe, so that I can better understand some of the design needs, because the recreation management plans had some rough drawings of their access locations, and I couldn't tell whether they were ADA accessible or what would be even desirable to ask for in that. So that would be great to know.
So David, go ahead. Everyone's so polite this morning.
Yeah, a couple of things. And I'm not going to go into any detail, but there is a fight going on at the national level about the timing of submission of what is known as the 401 water quality certification. And it's being led by none other than the Morrisville Electric Company. And it would limit the amount of time the state has to respond to a FERC application, and it would take away the time period when the applicant, the FERC applicant, has not completed their studies. The clock would start running as soon as the application was submitted. Important fight. Go to the Vermont Trout Unlimited website to learn more about the issue. Secondly, most of the reason, in my personal opinion, that the salmon restoration program failed was not because of how the main stem dams restrict upstream access, but in fact because smaller dams on tributaries where salmon spawn remained in place. Now that's starting to change, but there's an important meeting coming up May 27th in front of the Vermont Public Utilities Commission about whether or not Green Mountain Power dams, and I believe there are 14 overall around the state, would become FERC licensed dams or remain under the jurisdiction of the Vermont Public Utilities Commission. If you have some interest in that, go to the Public Utility Commission website. And now on to the important stuff, fishing access to the Connecticut River. Not everybody uses a boat. There are some of us who are uncomfortable in boats, canoes, kayaks, power boats, whatever. If it floats, you can fall out of it. And I prefer to walk on the ground. Consequently, foot access to the river is an issue that seldom gets addressed, and in particular at where tributaries enter the Connecticut River. Just two, right here in my area, the Saxons River is virtually impossible for someone other than a rock climber to get into one of the prime shad fishing spots on the main river. And all it would take is a set of stairs that would allow someone to my age and limited physical ability to be able to get down to the river and chase one of our premier fish on the Connecticut River, which is proof of the pudding of what I said about salmon and small dams. Shad are main river spawners. We have, now that Vermont Yankee is closed and they're no longer heating up the river, had record returns of American shad in their historic range. And I thank the power companies for maintaining that ladder system. Now, once you're in the river, presuming that the power companies respond and put in access, say at Wilder and Bellows Falls for foot traffic, it's important to know what the flows are. Right now, there is an online flow forecast page, and I would like to see that the coming license requires that that page continue so that you can go in and find out what the forecast is in terms of what flow levels are going to be so that you don't find yourself in a rising river. Those are my comments. I guess they're not necessarily questions, but if Kathy, you have any response, or Matthew, if you have any response, that would be fine. Thank you.
Yeah, I would love to see that waterline site. And I know it's not, you know, it's a separate company that does that, but it's archaic. I mean, it's like from the beginning of the internet. And at this point, I really think it would be great if there was a process where you could subscribe to your smartphone and you would get pushed texts if the water levels were going to change suddenly, so you would know when you're on the water. I have yet to be on the river when I did not have an excellent cell phone signal, better than what I can get in town. So, you know, how to do that in this relicensing when it's not up to the companies. I mean, these are, First Lake, I think, doesn't even use that water line system, but, you know, trying to figure out if the companies could put some pressure on that water line to make it better would be great, or develop their own. I don't know. Noah, I saw your hand go up first, so why don't you go first, and then we'll.
Yeah, sure, David. Thank you for bringing up that Saxon River spot. I actually had a conversation, I believe, with the landowner a year ago who was interested in seeing that happen, and that could be a great project if there was a kind of an offsite mitigation. I guess that's probably outside the project boundary. It certainly isn't controlled by Great River Hydro, but definitely happy to work with you. And yeah, if there's a fund set aside for recreation projects, that would be a top priority. We have a supportive landowner for sure.
Awesome.
Well, there's also the access that's just been closed off in the past year over at the Cold River on the New Hampshire side. And you now have to rappel down a cliff in order to get access to the Connecticut River from the New Hampshire side.
Interesting. You know, years ago, I had done like a tour of fishing access sites with Warren Coleman up on the upper river. And I think it's probably time to do that same thing for, you know, from the foot access perspective, not just boaters. So it seems like you've roped yourself into a project, David, to help us sort out the needs.
I was going to offer to work with you on it.
Perfect. Look forward to it.
Awesome. Thanks. Walter, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I just wanted to speak briefly about whitewater, because in Montague and Turner's Falls, where there's going to be more water in what they call the bypass reach, I think it's about 2 miles that goes throughout town. We're going to have water where we didn't have water before. And it's going to, you know, there's 8 boatable flows on Saturdays, July through October. And then, you know, we're assuming other boatable times throughout the year as well. That's opening up a whole section of the river right next to our downtown that's, you know, never been used before really for recreational purposes, because there was no water, it was raw riverbed there. And, you know, the town's intrigued and interested in this idea, but we don't feel wholly prepared for having whitewater rafting in town. And we're just kind of putting out there, you know, we're looking for all the help we can get to plan and prepare for this. We don't know what we need in terms of, you know, public safety equipment and personnel training. You know, what laws we have to have on the books, how to manage people in a part of the river that was never there before. And, you know, we're looking at possibly having whitewater rafting companies come into town and run, you know, bus loads of people through, and we just want to be prepared for that. So I just want to put that out there as one of our kind of priorities and something we're looking for help on.
Kathy, I know Brian from Berkshire E/Zor is on. Brian, not to put you on the spot, but I don't know if you can chime in regarding whitewater.
Yeah, happy to chime in. And Walter, if you want to give me a call, I'm happy to talk to you about what we've done there in the past and what we hope to do in the future. But yeah, I mean, we have been running with we've been running rafts periodically on.
Could you turn your sound up?
Is that better?
Yeah, maybe just talk louder, Brian. We can hear you.
Yeah. Yeah, we have been, Walter, if you'd like to contact me, I'd be happy to discuss this further. Just give you an idea of what Zor and Berkshire Whitewater have done there in the past is on, we've obviously paddled all the flow studies that took place below Turner's Falls Dam, and we will run that section on just kind of the spring runoff as well. And we always schedule a raft trip that goes about probably 50% of the time on that first weekend in June when the Deerfield is at a minimum flow for the free fishing weekend. Given all the water that's there now, I'm suspecting that'll run this year as well. Most of those trips are fairly small. Obviously, once you have guaranteed releases, that gives you the opportunity to run a larger volume in the future. Yeah, but I'm happy to discuss any or answer any questions you might have, Walter, and kind of explain how we operate and what we're hoping to do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Because we've got a lot of logistical planning to do, particularly if Poplar Street Riverway is coming out. That's in a residential neighborhood, and they're not proposing any changing stations or parking areas. So there's a lot of little logistics we need to figure out.
Yeah, I'll share my info in the chat.
Great. Thank you, Brian.
Great. So we are, we got 5 minutes left. And so I just want to try to be cognizant of folks' times. We have found every time we've done one of these, it's never enough time to talk. And I love the opportunities for the different stakeholders to be able to connect with each other. And so, as I said before, we've been doing these because FERC really needs to hear from all of the stakeholders in the area, individuals, towns, companies, to make sure that FERC, in the short term, understands that people are engaged and that there are particular things that you're interested in seeing, in this case for recreation, as a result of the relicensing. And so, we will follow up with everyone with some additional information, more detailed information, so you have it. We will also add everyone we have a Hydropower email update, so that we can let you know when the public comment period opens. We will be trying to make a, kind of a short, this is how you comment, like step-by-step plan with a template. So, I really encourage everyone to dig into the details of this, start to really think about, from your perspective or your town's perspective, like what you want to see for recreation on the river for the next 40 years. Write it down and be ready to submit those comments to FERC. We'll have another opportunity, as David alluded to. There's the 401 process, which will occur over the next year, probably 18 months, possibly longer. And there'll be another opportunity then to comment. And so, engagement, like this is a public process, and the FERC is not going to pay attention if the public is not asking. So Kristen, a couple more hands. Kristen, go ahead.
Sure. Thanks, Kathy. I also just wanted to share, David and others have brought up the 401. So just to say that we're actively talking, meaning we, CRC, American Whitewater, AMC, et cetera, talking with the state about really making recreation a priority. And we just organized a letter to Governor Baker that went to the Western Mass delegation that had a number of different outdoor retailers, including Central Rock Climbing, Berkshire East, Berkshire Whitewater, Zor, a number of other folks, REI. If anybody wants to see a copy of that letter, it really cites the amount of money that's spent on recreation in Massachusetts, and particularly Western Mass, and how important it is for them, especially given the increase in recreation and the pandemic, to really invest some money in this over the long haul. So I'll put my email in the chat as well if people want to see that. But we are using every tool in our toolbox to get the attention of First Light and to really beef up the minuscule investment that they are making, again, in one of the poorest counties in the state of Massachusetts. So
thanks for saying that, Kristen. The same things are happening in Vermont and New Hampshire. Both states have established an Office of Outdoor Recreation within the past 5 years, and are really looking at the recreation economy as an important driver over the coming decades. So it's a big deal. And David,
I'll just add, Kathy, there's the bill of supporting the Office of Outdoor Recreation actually has a hearing coming up. It's I think May 18th. So if anybody wants information on that too, let us know. It'd be great to get something like that established and to have support of folks on that.
Yeah, Kristen, send me more info on that, because I've been talking to legislators about that, but not aware of when hearings pop up sometime.
Yep. Yeah, we're working on a letter, a form, hopefully a Google form. Anybody can just sign on and endorse the legislation that's been sponsored by, I think, Senator Hines in the Senate and I believe Rep. Blay in the House. So we can, maybe Kathy, we can include that in the follow-up email.
Great, yeah. And David Thomas, you also had your hand up. Oh, wait, you're muted, Dave.
There you go. All right, there, sorry. First, I'd just like to thank the long haulers on the call here who have been advocating for river use for so many years. Tom, you've been in it for a long time, and others. But it's really kind of helped. I think it's had huge help how frustrating it's been over the years. But the point kind of Kristen alluded to about the increase in recreation, that's kind of silver lining, you know, of COVID, I guess, is that people kind of experience the outdoors. And from a number of different sources I found, from like, you know, up in Maine, you know, they had at Baxter State Park, they said they've briefed all the rangers about the need to kind of be ready for a bunch of really sort of quote unquote green sort of outdoorsy people, you know, experience the outdoors, not really knowing what to do and, you know, have to be safe, but just have found it during COVID. And they're expecting a 50% peak this year in usage of their facilities. So I think it's timely and it should be noted specifically to the COVID pandemic that FERC needs, not FERC, but Great Hydro needs to kind of step up their effort here, you know, in terms of outreach and, you know, money towards infrastructure to kind of help with this. And towards, I think it was Karen who's talking about storage of kayaks, you know, as an issue. I've seen in Florida, there's some basically using culverts like as storage tubes for kayaks and canoes, where you can put like a little chain link door on it, and they can have rentals or free, whatever, for the community to use, where you can basically have like, you know, some storage sites that are secure for your paddles, life jackets, and your kayak, you know, on site, because a lot of people don't have access to a vehicle to transport your boat and that sort of stuff. So it's just kind of thing, making it easier for people to access the outdoors, specifically the water trail here, and obviously the outreach for new paddlers on the river, I think is important with this huge increase of interest in recreation post-COVID here. So
Great. Thanks, David. All right, so with that, we are at 10:30. Hope everybody actually had some coffee and is ready to get out there for the rest of your day. Don't hesitate to reach out to us with additional questions, or, you know, if we can help you in any way. And we are going to harass you to make sure that you comment. So thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. That was wonderful. Always helpful.
Thanks.
Hey, Brian, nice to meet you. So, oh, yeah.